She was tied to the railroad with a sign, until a cowboy stopped the train with his bare hands. It was a quiet morning in the small, sleepy town nestled deep in the Texas countryside. The sun had just begun to rise, casting soft golden light over the fields, making the dew on the grass sparkle like tiny diamonds. Birds chirped lazily, and a gentle breeze moved through the trees, carrying with it the smell of wet earth and wildflowers. On the edge of town, where the fields stretched endlessly, a set of old railroad tracks ran straight through the land, connecting the town to the wider world. Most mornings these tracks were empty, silent, and peaceful. But today, something unusual would break that peace in a way no one could forget.
The cowboy, a man in his late 30s named Jake, was riding his horse along the tracks.
He was tall and lean, with broad shoulders and calloused hands, a man shaped by years of hard work on the ranch. His brown hat shaded his eyes, and his leather boots dug into the stirrups as he guided his horse along the familiar path. Jake had ridden the stretch of track countless times before. It was his morning ritual, a quiet time before the day's work on the ranch began. He liked the calm of the open fields, the sound of the horse's hooves against the dirt, and the way the wind tugged at his shirt. It gave him time to think and prepare for the long day ahead. But this morning was different. As he rounded a slight bend in the tracks, Jake noticed something strange in the distance. At first he thought it was a shadow or perhaps a bundle of cloth caught in the brush. But as he rode closer, the shape became clearer. His heart skipped a beat. There, tied to the tracks, was a young woman. She was struggling against thick ropes that bound her hands and feet, and a sign was strapped across her chest. The words were scrawled hastily in black ink, but Jake could read them even from a distance. They were a warning and a plea at the same time. Time seemed to slow for Jake. His mind raced as he tried to understand what he was seeing. Why would someone be tied to the tracks? Who would do such a thing? And, most importantly, how much time did he have before a train might come down this track? The thought of the massive locomotive hurtling toward her, with no way for her to escape on her own, sent a jolt of fear straight through his chest. Jake urged his horse forward, the animal sensing the urgency in his movements. The horse's ears flicked back nervously, but Jake kept a firm hand on the reins. His voice was calm, though his heart was pounding. "Easy, girl. Stay calm. We're almost there." As he approached, he could see the woman's face more clearly. She was young, perhaps in her early 20s, with wide eyes that held both fear and desperation. Her hair was tangled and dusty, and her cheeks were streaked with tears and dirt. The ropes dug into her skin, and it was clear she had been struggling for some time. Jake slowed his horse, scanning the horizon. He knew the tracks were used regularly, though trains didn't come every hour. But he couldn't take the risk. A single miscalculation could cost a life. He dismounted quickly, letting the horse wander to the side, keeping it out of the way. His boots hit the ground with a soft thud against the dirt and gravel, and he crouched low to get a better look at the situation. He could see that the ropes were thick and tight, not something that could be undone easily. The woman's hands were tied behind her back, and her legs were pulled together, making it impossible for her to move freely. The sign on her chest was shaky but readable. It said something that made Jake's stomach turn, a warning that hinted at danger, though he couldn't fully understand who had left her here or why. Regardless, he knew he had no time to hesitate. His mind flashed to stories he had heard as a boy growing up in the countryside. Stories of courage, of ordinary people performing extraordinary acts when lives were at stake. Jake had never considered himself a hero. He was a simple man, a rancher, someone who worked hard and lived quietly. But standing there, looking at the terrified young woman, he realized that today he had a choice. He could turn away, let someone else deal with it, or he could act. And deep down he knew he could not ignore what was happening in front of him. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. The morning air felt cool against his face, but his palms were sweaty. He approached her slowly, speaking in a calm, soothing voice. "It's okay. You're going to be all right." "I'm here to help." The woman's eyes widened as she looked at him. There was a flicker of hope there, but it was fragile, like a candle in the wind. She nodded slightly, too scared to speak, her lips trembling. Jake knelt beside her, assessing the ropes. They were tied in complex knots, probably meant to hold her securely for a long time. He tried to pull at them, testing their strength, but they wouldn't budge. His mind raced, thinking of ways to free her quickly. He could see the muscles in his arms tensing as he considered his options. He had no tools, no helpers, and no time to waste. Suddenly, a distant whistle pierced the air. The sound was faint at first, but it grew louder, echoing across the fields. Jake froze. The train. It was coming faster than he expected. He could see the metal tracks vibrating slightly, a warning that the massive engine was not far off. Panic surged through him, but he pushed it aside. There was no room for fear. Not now. He reached for the woman's hands, trying to untie the ropes, but they were too tight. He knew brute strength alone wouldn't be enough. He looked around quickly, scanning for anything he could use. A stick, a rock, anything that could help loosen the knots. His eyes fell on a heavy piece of wood nearby, and he grabbed it, using it as leverage. Sweat ran down his forehead as he worked quickly, the sound of the approaching train growing louder with every second. The woman watched him, her eyes wide with fear and trust all at once. She could feel the urgency in his movements, the determination in his hands and posture. For the first time since being tied to the tracks, she felt a small spark of hope. She tried to help by wriggling slightly, making it easier for him to get the ropes loose. But the ropes were relentless, biting into her skin, holding her fast. Jake's heart pounded. He could hear the train's wheels clanging against the tracks now, a thunderous, unstoppable sound. He knew that if he didn't act immediately, the consequences could be fatal. Every second stretched into what felt like minutes, each one filled with tension and fear. He worked with everything he had, pulling, twisting, and pushing against the ropes with all his strength. His muscles burned, but he refused to give up. In that moment, nothing else existed. There was no town, no ranch, no morning ritual. There was only him, the woman, and the train hurtling toward them. His mind focused entirely on one goal, saving her life. He had faced challenges before, but nothing like this. This was raw, urgent, and real. The woman's eyes filled with tears, and she whispered a quiet prayer under her breath. She didn't know who this man was, but she felt a strange sense of safety in his presence. Even as the train roared closer, she believed, somehow, that he would not let anything happen to her. Jake felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, heavier than any saddle he had ever carried. He gritted his teeth and continued to work, pulling harder, twisting faster, refusing to let panic take over. The ropes were tight, but he was determined. There was no other option. And then, just as the sound of the train became deafening, he felt the ropes begin to give. A small gap appeared, and with a final desperate effort, he managed to loosen them enough to free her hands. He grabbed her, lifting her carefully, moving her off the tracks as quickly as possible. Her body was trembling, but she was alive. They stumbled to the side of the tracks, the train thundering past them by mere inches. The force of the air from its passage nearly knocked them over, but they held on to each other. The ground vibrated beneath them, and the sound of the engine faded slowly as it disappeared into the distance. Jake and the woman collapsed onto the grass, both of them gasping for breath. The morning sun shone down on them, the wind rustling the trees, and for a moment the world was silent again. The danger had passed, but the memory of it would stay with them forever. Jake looked at her, seeing the fear in her eyes slowly giving way to relief. She was safe now, and he had done what he came to do. But he also knew that this was only the beginning of a story that would change both of their lives forever. After the deafening roar of the train faded into the distance, the early morning calm returned to the fields. The birds cautiously began their songs again, and the wind whispered through the trees. But for Jake and the young woman, the silence was heavy, filled with adrenaline and the lingering shock of what had just happened. The woman was still trembling in his arms, her body shaking not just from fear but from relief. Jake could feel her small frame pressed against him, and he realized just how close they had come to disaster. Every second they had hesitated, every second that rope had held her down could have been the difference between life and death. He gently guided her to sit down on the soft grass beside the tracks, careful not to jostle her.
"You're safe now,"
he said softly, his voice steady even though his heart was still racing.
"The train is gone, and no one is going to hurt you here.
You're okay." She looked up at him with wide, tear-filled eyes, trying to speak but finding only a choked whisper. He waited patiently, giving her a moment to catch her breath, knowing that words were the last thing she needed right now. The woman's name was Emily, and though she was still frightened, she finally found her voice.
Thank you,"
she stammered, her voice barely audible.
I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been here." Her words were simple, but the emotion behind them was immense. Jake nodded, acknowledging her gratitude with a small, reassuring smile.
He didn't consider himself a hero, but he understood the importance of staying calm and offering comfort when someone had just faced something so terrifying. Emily shivered, and Jake noticed that her clothes were torn and dusty, evidence that she had been struggling for some time. Her hair was tangled and matted with dirt, and her face was pale, streaked with dried tears. He knew she needed more than just reassurance. She needed care, food, and a place to feel safe. But first, he had to make sure no immediate danger remained. He scanned the area quickly, eyes moving over the tracks and surrounding fields. There was no one in sight, no figures lurking in the distance, no suspicious movement. The only sounds were the distant rumble of the train now far behind them, the soft rustle of grass in the wind, and Emily's uneven breathing. Jake allowed himself a moment to relax slightly, knowing that the immediate threat had passed, but he didn't let his guard down completely. He was still aware that danger could be nearby, hidden from view. Carefully, he helped Emily to her feet, supporting her as she tried to steady herself. "Can you walk?" he asked gently. She nodded, gripping his arm for support as they moved a short distance away from the tracks. Every step was slow and deliberate, making sure she didn't stumble. Jake's mind was already working, thinking about what to do next. The nearest town was several miles away, and there would be people there who could help, but getting there safely was the first priority. As they walked, Emily began to explain, her voice still shaky but gaining strength. She had been taken by people who wanted to scare her and send a message to someone else. She didn't know all the details, only that she had been left tied to the tracks as part of their plan. Jake listened carefully, nodding and offering occasional words of reassurance. He didn't interrupt her, knowing that it was important for her to speak and process what had happened. Despite her fear, there was a growing sense of trust between them. Emily could see in Jake's eyes that he was determined to protect her, and that knowledge gave her a small measure of comfort. She realized that this man, a stranger only moments ago, had risked his life without hesitation to save hers. It was a strange and powerful feeling, to experience both terror and relief in such a short span of time. They continued walking through the fields, the tall grass brushing against their legs and the sun climbing higher in the sky. Jake kept an eye out for any sign of trouble, scanning the horizon for movement. At the same time, he tried to engage Emily in small talk, gently distracting her from the lingering fear. He asked about her family, her hometown, and the little things she liked, anything to bring normalcy back into her life, even for just a few moments. As they moved farther from the tracks, Emily began to calm down. Her breathing slowed, and the trembling that had consumed her began to ease. Jake noticed the change and felt a small sense of relief himself. He knew that keeping her calm was as important as removing her from immediate danger. Panic, after all, could be as deadly as the train itself had been. After a short while, they reached a dirt path that led toward the nearest farmhouse. Jake decided it would be best to get Emily somewhere safe before contacting the authorities. The farmhouse belonged to an elderly couple who were known in the town for their kindness. They would offer shelter, water, and food while they figured out the next steps. Jake knocked on the door, explaining the situation briefly, but calmly. The couple quickly welcomed Emily inside, offering her a warm blanket and a glass of water. For the first time that morning, she felt truly safe. Sitting by the fire, Emily sipped the water slowly, letting the warmth soothe her trembling hands. Jake remained standing near the doorway, his eyes scanning the horizon even as he tried to relax. The farmhouse was safe, But he knew that the story didn't end here. Whoever had left Emily tied to the tracks might still be out there, watching, waiting. He made a mental note to stay alert, but for now, he allowed himself to focus on the present moment, her safety and recovery. Emily finally found the courage to speak more openly about what had happened. She told Jake about the events leading up to her being tied to the tracks. She had been taken earlier that morning, forced into a situation that had left her terrified and alone. The people who had done this had left the sign as a warning, but she didn't know who it was meant for or why she had been chosen. Jake listened carefully, piecing together the fragments of her story, trying to understand the full picture without letting panic take over. Throughout the conversation, Jake remained calm, offering gentle encouragement. "You're safe now," he repeated. "No one is going to hurt you here. We'll make sure of that." His words were simple, but the tone carried weight, reassuring Emily in a way that helped her begin to let go of some of her fear. Slowly, the tension in her body began to ease, though the memory of the ropes and the approaching train lingered in her mind. As the morning passed, Jake and Emily talked more. He shared stories of life on the ranch, of the quiet joys and the small struggles that came with working the land. Emily listened, occasionally laughing softly at his anecdotes, finding a brief escape from the terror of the morning. For a moment, the world felt normal again, and the bond between them grew stronger. It was a bond forged not in comfort, but in shared survival and the recognition of courage in the face of danger. By midday, the farmhouse was bustling with activity as neighbors began to arrive, having heard about the incident. Concerned townspeople brought blankets, food, and supplies, offering support and comfort to Emily. Jake stood to the side, quietly observing, knowing that the young woman now had a network of people who would protect her. For him, the satisfaction was not in praise or recognition, but in knowing she was safe. As the sun climbed higher, Emily's confidence began to return. She could move more freely now, her body no longer consumed by fear. The immediate threat had passed, and the presence of caring, attentive people gave her hope. Jake finally allowed himself to relax, the tension in his shoulders easing as he realized that the morning's danger was behind them. Even as they celebrated the small victory of survival, Jake knew that this was only the beginning of Emily's journey. There would be questions to answer, investigations to conduct, and a need to ensure that such a situation would never happen again. But for now, the priority was healing, safety, and a quiet understanding that courage and quick thinking had made all the difference. By late afternoon, Emily was sitting outside the farmhouse enjoying the warmth of the sun and the simple comfort of being alive. Jake remained nearby, watching over her with quiet attentiveness. The morning had been a test of bravery and resolve, and both had proven themselves in unexpected ways. For Emily, it was the start of recovery and trust. For Jake, it was a reminder that sometimes ordinary people are capable of extraordinary acts when circumstances demand it. The morning had passed, but for Jake, the adrenaline of the earlier event still coursed through his veins. The memory of Emily tied to the tracks, helpless and terrified, stayed with him, replaying in vivid detail like a scene he could not shake. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the rope cutting into her wrists, the fear in her eyes, and the massive train approaching at impossible speed. The image was burned into his mind, reminding him that life could change in an instant, and courage was sometimes the only choice left. But now, with Emily safe at the farmhouse, Jake allowed himself a few moments to catch his breath. He sat quietly on a wooden fence post nearby, his hat pulled low over his eyes, and thought about what had just happened. He didn't consider himself a hero. He was just a man who saw someone in danger and acted. But the truth was undeniable. He had done something extraordinary, something few people could claim to have the courage to attempt. Meanwhile, Emily sat inside the farmhouse, wrapped in a warm blanket, staring out the window at the fields. She couldn't stop thinking about what had happened on the tracks. The terror she had felt moments before was still fresh in her mind, and she found herself shivering slightly, despite the warmth of the sun outside. The thought of the train barreling toward her, the thunderous sound of metal wheels against metal tracks, made her stomach tighten. She realized that without Jake, she would not have survived, and the depth of her gratitude was overwhelming. As Jake finished checking on the farmhouse surroundings, he walked back inside. Emily looked up as he entered, her eyes meeting his. There was a silent understanding between them, an unspoken acknowledgment of the bond that had formed in the face of danger. She tried to speak, but the words faltered in her throat. Instead, she nodded, and he returned the gesture, his expression calm yet full of the weight of what had just occurred. The next moments were quiet, almost peaceful, but beneath the surface both of them were processing the events in their own ways. Jake thought about the train, the seconds that had counted so desperately, and the physical strength it had taken to save Emily. He remembered the feeling of her small body in his arms, the tension in her muscles as he struggled to free her from the ropes, and the sheer force of will it had required to pull her out of harm's way. It was a memory that would stay with him forever, a moment that defined bravery in its purest form. Emily, meanwhile, tried to calm her racing thoughts. She thought about the ropes, the sign, and the unknown people who had left her in such a terrifying situation. The fear she had felt was raw and immediate, but now, with Jake there, she felt a flicker of hope. She realized that bravery could come in many forms, not just in facing danger, but in trusting someone else to help when you were powerless. That trust, fragile yet powerful, was a new feeling for her, and it gave her a sense of relief she hadn't felt in hours. Jake moved closer to her, sitting in a chair across from where she was wrapped in the blanket. He spoke softly, carefully choosing his words.
"Emily, I know this is hard to understand right now, but you're safe. The train is gone and no one can reach you here."
"You're not alone anymore." His voice carried warmth and reassurance, the kind that made her feel like the terror of the morning was slipping further away with each passing minute. She nodded, holding on to the blanket tightly as if it could shield her from every memory of fear. After a few moments, Jake asked gently, "Can you tell me exactly what happened this morning?"
"I want to understand so we can make sure you stay safe."
Emily took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she began to explain. She spoke of how she had been taken earlier in the morning, led away from her home under the threat of harm, and eventually left tied to the railroad tracks. Every detail she shared made Jake's jaw tighten, the anger and concern mingling in his chest. He could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him, knowing that he had been the only reason she survived. As Emily spoke, Jake's mind wandered back to the tracks. He remembered the sound of the train approaching, the thunderous rhythm of its wheels on the rails, and the roar that had filled the air. He remembered the way time had seemed to slow as he approached her, the seconds stretching endlessly, each one carrying the potential for disaster. And he remembered the feeling of desperation and determination, the sheer will it had taken to pull her from danger. It was a memory that was vivid, terrifying, and exhilarating all at once. Emily's voice broke through his thoughts. She was describing how the ropes had been tight, how she had struggled in vain to free herself, and how hopeless it had felt in those final moments before Jake arrived. Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were tears of gratitude rather than fear. She looked at Jake, and for the first time since the morning began, she felt a sense of security that she hadn't known was possible. Jake listened quietly, nodding and offering the occasional word of encouragement. He wanted her to feel heard, to know that her story mattered and that her survival was important. He also wanted to prepare himself for what would come next, contacting the authorities, finding out who had done this, and ensuring that no one else would be put in such a terrifying situation. But for now, the immediate focus was on Emily, on helping her regain her composure, and on acknowledging the gravity of what had just occurred. The farmhouse was warm and inviting, the smell of fresh bread and coffee drifting from the kitchen. The contrast between the comfort of the room and the terror of the tracks outside was stark, but it was a welcome relief. Emily slowly began to relax, sipping water and letting the warmth of the sun and the house seep into her body. Jake stayed nearby, a steady presence, watching over her and ensuring that she felt safe. The silence between them was comfortable, a shared understanding that words could not fully capture. After a short while, Jake suggested that they step outside for a moment. The fresh air would help Emily regain her strength and composure. She nodded, and with his support, they walked to a small porch overlooking the fields. The sun was higher now, casting long shadows across the land. The gentle rustle of the wind and the distant call of birds created a sense of normalcy that both of them desperately needed. Standing on the porch, Emily looked out over the fields, her mind slowly clearing. She realized that she had survived something unimaginable, and the courage it had taken to endure those moments was part of her now. She felt a sense of gratitude toward Jake that was hard to put into words. He had acted without hesitation, without thinking of himself, and had saved her life with nothing but his determination and strength. Jake, meanwhile, was reflecting on the events as well. He knew that the physical act of saving Emily had been extraordinary, but he also understood that courage was not just about strength. It was about quick thinking, calmness under pressure, and the willingness to act when no one else could. That morning had tested every part of him, and he had discovered a capacity for bravery he hadn't fully realized existed. As the day continued, the reality of the situation began to settle in. Emily was safe. The immediate danger had passed, and the memory of the train, the ropes, and the fear could start to fade. But Jake also knew that this was just the beginning of a longer journey. There would be questions to answer, support to provide, and perhaps even a need to confront the people responsible for what had happened. But for now, the focus was simple: healing, safety, and the quiet satisfaction that courage and quick thinking had saved a life. Emily finally spoke again, her voice calm but filled with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "I thought I was going to die this morning. I can't imagine what would have happened if you hadn't been there." Jake shook his head, a small smile on his face. "You don't need to thank me. You're alive, and that's what matters. That's enough." For the rest of the morning they stayed on the porch, watching the fields and letting the peace of the countryside settle over them. The memory of the train, the ropes, and the terror remained, but it was tempered by relief and the realization that life had been preserved. Emily's trust in Jake had grown, and a bond had formed, built on gratitude, courage, and the shared experience of facing danger together. By noon, the farmhouse was bustling with neighbors who had heard of the incident and came to offer support. Blankets, food, and comforting words were shared freely, creating a network of safety and care around Emily. Jake observed quietly, knowing that the young woman was now surrounded by people who would help her recover. He felt a sense of quiet satisfaction, understanding that his role, while vital in that moment, was now part of a larger story of community, care, and resilience. As the sun climbed higher, Emily's confidence grew. She could move more freely, her trembling reduced, and her fear began to fade. Jake, standing nearby, watched with a mix of relief and pride. He knew that courage could take many forms, and that morning had shown both of them what it meant to act decisively in the face of danger. The memory of the tracks, the ropes, and the train would never fully leave them, but it had become a testament to human courage, trust, and the power of quick, decisive action. For Emily, it was a lesson in hope and gratitude. For Jake, it was a reminder that even ordinary people could perform extraordinary acts when circumstances demanded it. After the terrifying morning by the railroad tracks, a quiet stillness settled over the farmhouse. Sunlight streamed through the windows, warm and comforting, but inside, the weight of what had happened hung heavy in the air. Emily sat at the kitchen table, wrapped in a soft blanket, her hands around the warm cup of tea. He could feel the lingering tremor in her body. The memory of being tied to the tracks was still vivid, even though she was safe now. Every time she closed her eyes, she remembered the thick ropes, the helplessness, and the distant rumble of the train. Jake sat across from her, his hat in his lap, his expression calm but thoughtful. He was watching her closely, not in a way that felt intrusive, but to ensure she truly felt safe. For him, the adrenaline of the morning had faded, replaced by a careful focus on understanding the situation and ensuring nothing like this could happen again. He had saved her from immediate danger, but the questions surrounding her capture remained unanswered. Who had done this, and why? How had she ended up on the tracks alone? These questions weighed on both of them, and Jake knew they would need answers soon. Emily finally spoke, her voice quiet but steady. I don't even know where to start," she said, her eyes fixed on the cup in her hands. "It all happened so fast. I was just going about my morning, and suddenly I was grabbed. I tried to fight, but they were too strong. Then they left me on the tracks like I was some kind of message or warning. Her voice broke slightly, and Jake reached over, placing a reassuring hand over hers. "It's okay," he said gently. "You don't have to explain everything right now. We'll figure it out together." For a moment, Emily simply nodded, the tears welling in her eyes. She had never experienced something so frightening, and the fact that someone had saved her life when she had no hope left was overwhelming. She looked at Jake, and in that moment she understood something important. He had acted without hesitation, without needing recognition, and without fear. That realization gave her a sense of safety she hadn't known she could feel. As the morning wore on, the farmhouse filled with neighbors and concerned townspeople. Word had spread quickly through the small town about the incident on the tracks, and people had come to offer comfort, food, and support. Jake had told them briefly what had happened, but he was careful not to exaggerate. He wanted the story to remain true, focusing on Emily's safety rather than his own actions. People were amazed by what they had heard, and many expressed admiration for his courage. But Jake remained humble, brushing off the praise with a simple, "I just did what anyone else would have done." Despite the support around her, Emily felt a mix of relief and curiosity. She wanted to understand why this had happened to her. She looked at Jake, her expression serious but trusting. Do you think they will come back?" she asked softly. Jake's brow furrowed slightly, and he shook his head. "Not if we're careful," he said. "We'll make sure the authorities know what happened. They'll investigate, and no one will be able to harm you again. Right now, the most important thing is that you're safe, and we'll make sure it stays that way." Emily nodded, taking comfort in his words. She realized that she had been left completely vulnerable that morning, and the experience had left her shaken. But now, with Jake's presence and the support of the town, she felt the first flicker of hope. For the first time since being tied to the tracks, she allowed herself to breathe fully, letting the warmth of the sun and the safety of the farmhouse ease the tension in her body. As the day continued, Jake and Emily began to piece together the events that had led to the terrifying incident. She explained how she had been taken from a nearby area by people she didn't know, forced into a situation that was both frightening and confusing. The ropes on the tracks had been intended as a warning to someone else, a way to scare her and anyone who might have been searching for her. Jake listened carefully, asking questions where necessary, but always with sensitivity and care. He wanted to ensure he understood the situation fully, while also respecting Emily's feelings and trauma. With each detail Emily shared, the picture became clearer. It was evident that the people responsible had planned this carefully, yet they had underestimated one important factor: human courage and quick thinking. Jake had acted instinctively, relying on his experience, strength, and calmness under pressure to save Emily's life. The realization of how close she had come to disaster made both of them pause. It was a reminder of the fragility of life and the power of decisive action. The townspeople, while busy providing comfort and practical support, also began asking questions. They wanted to know how Emily had ended up on the tracks, who might have done this, and what could be done to prevent such a thing in the future. Jake answered carefully, focusing on the facts rather than speculation. He emphasized Emily's safety and the need to alert the authorities. His calm, measured approach reassured the community that the situation was under control. As afternoon approached, Emily began to regain a sense of normalcy. She walked around the farmhouse garden, feeling the grass beneath her feet and the sun on her face. Each small step was a victory, a reclaiming of her freedom after the terror she had endured. Jake walked beside her, offering support when needed but allowing her to regain her independence. It was a delicate balance, one that required patience, empathy, and understanding. During this time, Emily reflected on the bond that had formed between her and Jake. It was not a bond born of familiarity or friendship over years, but of shared experience and mutual trust in the face of danger. She realized that courage could inspire connection in ways that words alone could not. The memory of his strength, his calmness, and his determination to save her life would remain with her forever. Jake, for his part, was also reflecting on the events. He understood that what had happened that morning was extraordinary, yet he saw it as a reminder of the responsibilities that come with being aware and present in the world. He thought about the importance of helping others, of acting decisively in moments of crisis, and of the lasting impact such actions could have. For him, it was a lesson in human resilience and the value of compassion and courage. As evening approached, the authorities arrived to take Emily's statement and begin an investigation. Jake stayed nearby, ensuring that everything was handled carefully and respectfully. Emily spoke calmly, recounting the events in as much detail as she could, supported by Jake's presence. The authorities assured them that the situation would be thoroughly investigated and that steps would be taken to ensure her safety. After the authorities left, the farmhouse returned to a quiet, reflective state. Emily sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the fields, feeling a sense of peace that had been absent all morning. She realized that she had survived something unimaginable, and that the courage of one person had made all the difference. The gratitude she felt was profound, and she understood that her life had been forever changed by the events of that day. Jake sat beside her, the two of them sharing a comfortable silence. They didn't need to speak. The bond formed through shared experience was strong enough. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the fields and the farmhouse. In that moment, both Emily and Jake felt a sense of closure, knowing that the immediate danger was over and that steps were being taken to ensure it would not happen again. As night fell, the farmhouse was calm and quiet. Emily finally allowed herself to rest fully, the tension in her body easing as sleep began to take hold. Jake stayed awake a little longer, reflecting on the day's events, the courage displayed, and the bonds formed. He understood that life could change in an instant, and that ordinary people were capable of extraordinary acts when faced with moments that demanded bravery. The next morning would bring new questions, new challenges, and perhaps even new revelations about who had left Emily tied to the tracks. But for now, the focus was on recovery, safety, and the understanding that courage, quick thinking, and human kindness had saved a life. Emily had survived. Jake had acted heroically, and the community had rallied to support her. Together, they had turned a moment of terror into a testament to resilience, bravery, and the power of human connection. The days after the terrifying incident on the railroad tracks were a mixture of relief, reflection, and careful planning. Emily had survived a moment that could have ended her life, thanks to Jake's courage and quick thinking. But even as the immediate danger faded, the reality of what had happened began to settle in. She found herself thinking about it constantly, the ropes digging into her skin, the sound of the train approaching, the panic that had consumed her. Every time she remembered, a shiver ran down her spine. Yet alongside the fear, there was gratitude. Gratitude for being alive, for the people who had helped, and most of all, for Jake, the man who had risked everything to save her. Jake, on the other hand, returned to his routine on the ranch but could not forget the events of that morning. Every detail was etched into his memory. The fear in Emily's eyes, the thunder of the train, the desperate struggle to pull her free. He had always considered himself an ordinary man, but the incident had shown him that ordinary people were capable of extraordinary acts when life demanded it. He thought about the courage it took, the instinct to act without hesitation, and the responsibility he had felt. It was a heavy realization, but also a quiet source of pride. The local authorities were diligent in their investigation. They began by taking detailed statements from Emily, Jake, and the neighbors who had witnessed the aftermath. Evidence was collected along the railroad tracks, and officers searched the surrounding area for any clues about who had left Emily tied up and why. The investigation revealed that the perpetrators had planned the act carefully, likely to intimidate someone else, but they had underestimated the courage and timing of Jake's intervention. The knowledge that Emily had been spared by a matter of seconds was both chilling and awe-inspiring to everyone involved. Emily worked closely with the authorities, answering questions and providing as much detail as she could remember. Each recollection was difficult, forcing her to relive moments of fear and helplessness. But with Jake by her side, she felt safer. His presence was a constant reminder that she had survived, that she was not alone, and that there were people who would protect her. Slowly, she began to regain her confidence, knowing that the law was taking the necessary steps to bring the perpetrators to justice. The town rallied around Emily as well. Neighbors offered support, providing meals, company, and comfort. Some helped her with practical matters, such as ensuring she could travel safely to appointments or move about town without worry. Others simply offered listening ears, letting her speak about her experience and process her emotions. The community's response was overwhelming but comforting. Emily realized that she was not only protected by Jake's bravery, but also by an entire network of caring people. Amid this healing process, Emily began to reflect on the bond she shared with Jake. Their connection was not one born from years of friendship, but from the intense experience they had lived through together. The trust she had felt in the moments before the train arrived had grown into genuine appreciation and respect. Jake's calmness, courage, and steadfast presence had shown her the power of human kindness and heroism. She found herself thinking about how rare it was to meet someone who would act so decisively to protect a stranger.
Jake, meanwhile, continued to check in on Emily regularly.
He wanted to ensure she was adjusting, recovering, and feeling safe. Each visit reinforced the quiet bond between them.
They spoke often, sometimes about the events of the morning, other times about simple everyday matters, the ranch, the weather, or small joys in life.
Through these conversations, Emily slowly began to reclaim a sense of normalcy, realizing that while the past could not be changed, her present and future were now safer and more secure. As the investigation progressed, the authorities were able to identify the individuals responsible. Through a combination of witness statements, evidence at the scene, and investigative work, they tracked down the perpetrators and brought them to justice. The community felt a collective sense of relief, knowing that those who had endangered Emily were being held accountable, allowed her to focus on recovery rather than lingering fear. The process was thorough and careful, designed to ensure that justice was served while keeping Emily protected and supported throughout. Emily also began to process the emotional impact of the morning. She realized that surviving such a life-threatening experience had changed her. She had confronted fear in its most intense form and had lived to tell the story. That experience left her with a newfound appreciation for life, the fragility of safety, and the value of courage. She felt stronger, more resilient, and more grateful for every small moment she could enjoy without fear. Jake had shown her that courage existed in ordinary people, and that sometimes a single act of bravery could alter the course of someone's life forever. Jake, too, reflected on the morning in ways he hadn't expected. He realized that heroism was not just about physical strength, but about presence, decisiveness, and a willingness to act when someone else was in danger. He had felt responsibility in those critical seconds, and that responsibility had driven him to act with every ounce of his strength and skill. The memory of lifting Emily from the tracks, the weight of her small body in his arms, and the speed at which he had had to move, would remain with him forever. It was a reminder of the unpredictable nature of life and the extraordinary capacity for courage in ordinary people. Over time, Emily's fear gradually gave way to a sense of empowerment. She began to return to her normal activities, slowly reintegrating into her daily routine. The trauma of the morning still lingered in small ways. A sudden sound could startle her, or the memory of the tracks might flash unbidden in her mind. But with each passing day, those memories became easier to manage. He leaned on Jake's support, the guidance of authorities, and the care of her community. Each step forward was a small victory, a testament to human resilience and the power of support. One afternoon, several weeks after the incident, Emily and Jake walked along a quiet section of the countryside near the railroad tracks. The area had been cleared and inspected, and no danger remained. Emily looked at the tracks where her life had hung in the balance and felt a deep sense of gratitude. She turned to Jake, her eyes reflecting both appreciation and admiration. "You saved my life," she said softly. "I don't think I can ever truly thank you." Jake smiled, his expression calm but full of warmth. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "You're alive." "That's enough. I'm just glad I was there when you needed help." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of experience, reflection, and genuine care. Emily nodded, understanding that sometimes actions spoke louder than words. The bond between them had grown, not just from the life-threatening experience, but from the shared reflection, mutual respect, and quiet understanding that had developed in the weeks since. Emily realized that courage could inspire connection in ways that were subtle but profound. Jake understood that even ordinary people could make a life-altering difference when faced with moments that demanded bravery and quick thinking. As life gradually returned to normal, the story of the morning spread quietly through the town. People spoke of the bravery, the courage, and the calm decisiveness that had saved a life. The tale became not one of fear, but one of hope and inspiration. Parents told their children about courage in the face of danger. Friends spoke about the power of presence and action. And Emily, though humbled by the attention, felt a sense of empowerment, knowing that her story could inspire others. The legal process eventually concluded, and the perpetrators were held accountable. Justice was served, providing a sense of closure for Emily and the community. With the danger behind her, Emily could focus entirely on healing and moving forward. She remained deeply grateful to Jake, recognizing that his actions had been the turning point in her life. They continued to maintain a close friendship, built on mutual respect, shared experience, and the knowledge that bravery and kindness could change lives. In the months that followed, Emily grew stronger, both physically and emotionally. The memory of the morning never fully disappeared, but it became a story of survival and courage rather than fear. She learned to appreciate life more deeply, recognizing the fragility and beauty of each day. Jake continued his work on the ranch, but the experience left an indelible mark on him as well. He understood the profound impact one person's actions could have and the importance of being present and courageous when others needed help. One quiet evening, Emily and Jake sat on a small porch overlooking the fields near the tracks. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow across the land. The wind rustled gently through the trees, and for a moment, the world felt peaceful. Emily turned to Jake and said softly, "I'll never forget what you did. You gave me a second chance at life." Jake nodded, his eyes reflecting calm satisfaction and quiet pride. "You made it through," he said. "That's what matters. You're safe now, and that's all that counts." They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun dip below the horizon, both reflecting on the past, appreciating the present, and quietly hopeful for the future. The story of that morning remained in their hearts forever, a testament to courage, quick thinking, and the incredible power of human kindness. Emily's life had been spared, Jake's bravery had been proven, and the community had witnessed the extraordinary difference one person could make. It was a story that would be remembered not for fear, but for hope, resilience, and the enduring power of courage.